Okay, Joe, we're back. How you doing?
Just fine, Tim. We've been evacuated one last time, so I'm more like a refugee after World War II than a supposed American. But
You're here.
we're still standing. We actually, my wife and I did not evacuate, even though they call it a mandatory evacuation, and the police go door to door until you have to leave. But in fact, we didn't want to leave, so we didn't, and the disaster didn't happen, and so we're still here and ready to go. But being a refugee, I have a lot of sympathy for post-World War II Germans, because the whole nation was cast into a kind of almost indescribable and bizarre situation. With two things, with a number of things, but the most well-known are with the Eisenhower death camps, and then a plan to basically eliminate Germany's ability to have an industrial nation with a thing called the Morgenthau plan. What do you know about it, Tim? I think it's something that'd be good for us to talk about. The Morgenthau plan. What was it, and how did it get created? What can you tell us about it?
Well, the Morgenthau Plan, named after U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau Jr. He served in that position from, the early January 1934 to July 1945 under the administration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And the plan, from what I understand, is actually written by Harry Dexter White, a known communist agent, a spy. So you have that intrigue involved there. But the plan itself called for the deindustrialization and sort of diminishing Germany down to a pastoral nation, the inability for it to pretty much produce any industrial goods anymore, to even, so it can never raise an army ever again, so to speak. But so that was the idea behind the plan, was to diminish Germany. In fact, Morgenthau was so enthusiastic about it that he one time said his plan was to reduce Germany, reduce them just on a diet of potatoes, which kind of what the British did to Ireland. So
yeah, kind of like, isn't it?
Yeah. So that was the plan. I ran across an article about the Morgenthau plan, and it was written by Professor Anthony Kubek. And he writes, Secretary of U.S. Treasury Henry Morgenthau Jr. served in President Franklin Delano's cabinet from January of 1934 to July 1945. Before Morgenthau was appointed Secretary of the Treasury, he had lived near Roosevelt's home at Hyde Park, New York, and for 2 decades, and could be counted on as one of the closest and most trusted friends. His appointment was clearly the culmination of 20 years of devotion to and adoration of his neighbor on the Hudson. According to his official biographer, Morgenthau's first joy in life was to serve Roosevelt, whom he loved and trusted and admired. The Morgenthau diaries revealed that the Treasury presumed time and time again to make foreign policy, meaning Morgenthau was getting this out of the realm of finance into influencing foreign policy during the war. In his memoirs, Secretary of State Cordell Hull described it in these terms: emotionally upset by Hitler. I'm sorry. Here we go. Hall wrote, emotionally upset by Hitler's rise and his persecution of the Jews, Morgenthau often sought to induce the president to anticipate the State Department or act contrary to our better judgment. We sometimes found him conducting negotiations with foreign governments, which were the function of the State Department. His work in drawing up the catastrophic plan for the post-war treatment of Germany and the inducing the president to accept it without consultation with the State Department was an outstanding instance of this interference. But as I said, it was really Harry Dexter White, his assistant, the assistant secretary of Treasury, who drew up the plan. So it was sort of seen as sort of a retribution against Germany for its crimes during the war, particularly against the Jewish people in Europe, because Morgenthau indeed was Jewish, and so was Harry Dexter White. So it's seen as that, and like I said, it called for the deindustrialization of Germany and the sort of the destruction of the Ruhr Valley, which was the source of coal that fired German industry. And when Morgenthau was asked what would happen to the excess population in Germany if you deindustrialize, It couldn't support, the current population. He said he simply didn't care, meaning they were willing to see the death of millions and millions of more Germans in order to neutralize Germany. Because I guess from that point, Germany was seen as some sort of, almost genetically flawed country dedicated to militarism and aggression, and they needed to be destroyed. Of course, this is also done in the context of Kaufmann's book. Theodor Kaufmann wrote a book in 1940 called Germany Must Perish, where he advocated for the forced sterilization of the German people. He even got into specifics. He did the math. He said that after the war, if you could send in 20,000 surgeons within a few months, they could sterilize 48 million Germans. That's being the purpose. The 48 million being those of childbearing years in Germany. It called for that. And this was he wrote this in 1940. So this was long before the alleged final solution. This is being advocated by Jewish activists in the United States, and being, I guess you could say, it was picked up in the Morgenthau Plan and instantiated in policy in the Morgenthau Plan in 1944. Now, it was leaked at the Quebec meeting in 1944, the Morgenthau Plan, and of course the Third Reich, the German government, the Nazi government became aware of this, and it seemed to vindicate so much of Joseph Goebbels' propaganda of what Germany's adversaries intended to do to the Germans. And some say it actually worked to actually prolong the war because it stiffened German resolve, because once Germany got wind that the Western Allies were contemplating the destruction of Germany as a people, wiping them out, making Germany perish, obviously they're going to fight to the death, and they did up until May 1945. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, the Morgenthau Plan.
Right, and it's interesting. I think it was created as as something that was deliberately structured to never be implemented, but to create political cover. Mm-hmm. And my sense of it is that they wanted to basically enslave Germany following World War II, and they also wanted, I think, to continue to reduce population. We'll get into all that, but I think that they, as they often do, they create an extreme position from which, by doing something less than that, the suspicion about the actual intent of their, what they want to do is reduced. I know this seems kind of a little hard to understand, but that's really what I think the Morgenthau Plan was. It was just to create a really extreme position that then what became the Marshall Plan and the various reconstruction of Germany plans would be contrasted to. And then this would show that, well, look, we're not really trying to genocide the Germans. But the fact is that one of the effect that it did have was the first effect it had when it was leaked. Now, why would such a thing be leaked? I mean, it's obvious that it would stir German passion to resist, right? Well, that's why it was leaked, in my opinion. Is they wanted the war to go on, and they wanted there to be a rationale for Hitler's seemingly insane position of fighting down to the last German. Mm-hmm. Hitler had stated, I'm not sure I think it was after the Morgenthau Memorandum was leaked, but after that, he would basically say, we're fighting for the existence of the people, we have to fight down to the last man. So in other words, why couldn't, the German people basically get rid of Hitler when they realize that we've completely lost militarily? Any more fighting is just going to reduce our population further. It's time to sue for peace. But that didn't happen. And the Morgenthau Memorandum was one of the key points in that, because it made Hitler's behavior seem sane. So that's the the first point that I would make about the Morgenthau Memorandum, that its leaking gave tremendous ability for the Germans to that they could fight on to the bitter end, and the war did go on far longer than it should have. One of the things that and just to give an example, Goebbels actually went on and said that this was proof in black and white that the enemy was basically going to enslave and then destroy Germany, so that therefore we would continue to fight under any circumstances, right? Mm-hmm. And this so in other words, the effect of the plan was to basically prolong the war and also to make it less likely that Hitler would be assassinated, which he should have been long before the war ended, because he was carrying on a completely insane position. Okay, so now I wanted to just shift for a second, Tim, and talk about the Morgenthau plan in context. Because, this to me is the real sort of key that is necessary to kind of understand, what's really happening when you look at these crazy arcs of history. You have to look at these particular events in the context of what, can be determined as real. During this period when the Morgenthau plan is being, created and then leaked as a memorandum, you also have another phenomena that is prolonging the war, just as the Morgenthau plan did. And that was they restrained Patton from basically going straight forward to Berlin, which he said he could easily do and put an end to the war. The war went on for almost 9 months longer, and this was when the Russians came in with the hordes and basically destroyed and raped, so much of Eastern Germany. Mm-hmm. Is that Patton said, well, why are we, holding me back? I can easily, there's nothing to stop me. I can go straight forward and I can end this war. I can put an end to it. But that didn't happen. And then it was the reason for that supposedly is that General Montgomery was vain and didn't want Patton to get, ahead of him. And so he had Eisenhower create a military policy that you had to have a kind of a line of a parallel line between the military forces, even though this is completely insane in terms of any kind of military dictum, because the fact is that whoever can achieve victory should be going forward and doing it. But according to just this idea about Montgomery's patent, Montgomery's vanity, Patton was held back. So Patton is therefore, is really kind of a central figure in sort of understanding the Morgenthau plan. He criticized the plan, very much. He said this was horrible, and more importantly, Patton left behind a diary. And they were published by Houghton Mifflin Company in 45, the patent papers. And in there you get some of his letters. Now, one of the things that Patton said is that he felt that the war was put on, was basically kept going for a longer period of time than it needed to have been because of a Semitic plot. Well, that's his term. This is General George Patton. Now Patton has been accused of that this came from basically anti-Semitism, right? That it was anti-Semitic. But he felt that he said the virus started by Morgenthau and Baruch of a Semitic revenge against all Germans is something that is working in our State Department. So Patton then has this mysterious death. And I would say that, you can they have characterized all these events as unique and not related to one another. But I think that it's much more coherent. You produce a better understanding of history if you look at them as all within this context, right? And the context is World War II is trying to reduce population. It's really just a structure, primarily a Masonic structure, that is going to hold the German people in place. You have the Nazi Party, which is emerging mysteriously from the same organization that produces Zionism, and this produces the insane Adolf Hitler. Mm-hmm. Right. Now, on the other side, you have Winston Churchill, who states specifically that he hates Germans. Eisenhower, who is in charge of the German the Germany militarily following World War II, he also takes that position. He states, he says, I hate Germans. At the same time that this is going on, Tim, you've got the bizarre Nuremberg trials, right, where you have Ewan Cameron coming forward and saying, well, you know, Germans are really, that they are insane and evil people, and he actually talks about how they have to be destroyed or reduced. Now Cameron, of course, has you look at these people and you say, well, Churchill, we've gone into Churchill, the bizarre and mysterious relationship his family has to Freemasonry and his family's alliance and financial support by the Rothschild family. Okay, so you have secrecy in back of this individual. Eisenhower was exposed in his West Point yearbook as being Jewish, even though he doesn't really mention this often. But he too has this strange hatred of Germans, right? It's very mysterious. This hatred of a people is in motion in the leadership people, and then you've got Ewan Cameron, who ends up with MK Ultra, right? Again, you have someone who's in the world of secret society. So on one hand, we have what has been told us as the history, which is that you had the Holocaust by the German people. The Germans are evil, therefore. The Jews are people who are to be given special consideration in all things because of the suffering they had to go through the Holocaust. But you only have that, as a kind of socialization. You don't really have hard historical data about this. When we've talked about, just when C.D. Jackson was there at Buchenwald when they came into the camps and he had the fake shrunken heads and the fake human skin lampshade, they were already using the German, supposedly atrocities against the Jews in a propaganda sense, right? It's propaganda. So, what I'm saying is that, socialization is basically the sum total of the data, concerning history that people are given. And everyone who goes through the American school system or experience America's mainstream media is socialized in the way that I had characterized, where the Germans were evil. It's like that comic McDonald who made those jokes you were talking about, how the Germans were simply trying over and over again to conquer the world. Yeah. And therefore, whatever happened to them was they just brought it on themselves. So you have this socialization, and it ends up with basically what is socialization? Well, it's just a belief of a general sort of understanding of reality, which is used as intimidation. Mm-hmm. Because if now scholars are bringing forward all of these details about, how the Holocaust was basically misused as propaganda following World War II. Many of the details are fake, and yet it is the most powerful intellectual structure that people have in their lives, And so when you get to the Morgenthau plan, what I think we're dealing with basically is just it's a way that they can set up a situation where they can basically exterminate the German people, and look reasonable doing it, because both the German authorities will look rational to their people, because the Morgenthau Plan talks about the enslavement and destruction of Germans. But then when you have a plan where any part of component of Germans are able to go on and have some kind of industry, then you can say, well, look, we're not extreme. We didn't do anything really bad to the Germans. We were behaving reasonably. So that's how I see it, Jim. Am I sorry to be long-winded about it. I just wanted to make that one long-winded point.
No, all good points. You're right. I find it interesting that Morgenthau was quoted as saying that the Germans need psychiatry.
Yeah, they need you and Cameron.
You and Cameron, there you go. Yeah, so there's that connection there. They need psychiatry. They need to be psychologically decapitated and remolded if not killed. And you're right. The alleged Holocaust, the Holocaust narrative, and also the narrative that Hitler was seeking to conquer the world, which is just a crazy ambition. These things would justify things like the Morgenthau Plan or elements of it, just the killing and the total destruction, the firebombing of the cities, the raping of German womanhood, these things that occurred in the East, particularly in the East, occurred in the West too, but it was almost systematized in the East by the propaganda of one Elia Ehrenberg, who said, kill Germans. Yeah. If you haven't killed a German today, do it. If you've done it, do it again. There's all these quotes. He said that we must infect and destroy the German race through raping, which is all very primal. That's good. War is always like that, where you sort of take over the race by raping the women, showing the men you can rape the women, and that's what the Russians did when they came in. And it was usually it wasn't the frontline soldiers; it was the second line soldiers that had time to rape, because the frontline soldiers didn't have as much ethnic hatred. It was the second line, third line soldiers, the support soldiers who were further from the east or Asiatic, who Ehrenberg knew there's a racial component there, and that was done on purpose. That's stated policy, and I think to this day, I think that Eli Ehrenberg, I think eventually, his papers are at the that museum in Tel Aviv, the Holocaust Museum.
Yes,
and so he's acknowledged. He's kind of held up as a hero by the Israeli state.
Insane maniac,
yeah.
and yet they promote him as a hero, and so. You see this. I'm glad you brought up like the what went on with the Russians, when they came into Germany, because they were conducting a campaign of hatred as well.
Mm-hmm.
And now, one can say, well, of course there was hatred, but hatred as an official policy of a state is actually fairly unusual. Usually they just want to conclude the war and get reparations, but in this case, all of the individuals involved, Churchill, Eisenhower, Stalin, had this visceral hatred of Germans. And that's why it's so important to understand how the Nazi Party took power, how its origins, that it comes from Sabotendorf and Helena Blavatsky, where these individuals are directly coming from Quattro Coronati, the Freemason Lodge in Britain. And so when you see that this trajectory exists, and this trajectory also specifically produces Zionism. I mean, Nazism, the actual legal party, can really only be traced to Blavatsky and Sabotendorf. I mean, Sabotendorf is creating created the legal structure of the thing. Blavatsky gave it its relationship to National Socialism, the occultism, the kind of Aryan mysticism, and also the swastika. So I think that this is, when we say these are the origins of the Nazi Party, there's not really any other candidate that these things could have come from. And so you have to wonder, well, how is it possible? What is the analytic chance? How can you think about it rationally? That the same organization that created 100% of modern Zionism, right? I mean, Zionism is directly traced to this group. There isn't, again, you don't have any other I mean, it comes right from Palmerston, the Freemason Palmerston. It goes directly into the expeditions led by the royal family to Israel. These are all the promotion of the idea of Jews to return. And then from there, you directly have Quattro Coronati. And then, you've got Herzl, adopting as his trademark name in college one of the Quattro Coronati Disraeli, his one a character from his novel, and so it's a very, very straight trajectory. And my point is that analytically, it's not possible to be circumstance, Tim.
Yeah, because Zionism itself was sort of stagnating or was in a quagmire until after the Second World War.
Sure.
Most Jews weren't Zionists. After the Second World War, Jews became Zionists by default because of what they were told, what was told happened to them. They had to have their own state because they were you couldn't assimilate them. The world considered them their enemies, and therefore, and this was important in creating group cohesion. These things, but it's interesting you point out, the problem itself with the Holocaust. I think it was during the was it the trial for Ernst Zundel? It was Raoul Hilberg, the Holocaust historian, was forced to testify. And he under cross-examination, he was forced to admit that there was no evidence. He never found evidence for a policy of extermination of the Jews, nor evidence of a plan, no evidence of central organization, no budget, no supervision. Yet we were told this vast extermination program was being carried out in the middle of this war. There's no evidence of gas chambers. There's never been an autopsy done on a body to show that it was gas killed by Zyklon B. There's no evidence for these things. There's no orders from Hitler or Stalin for extermination, nor there's any explicit order to wipe out European Jewry in Europe. Although we do have explicit plans for the destruction of the German people. We have
evidence of, and certainly similar and evidence is just as strong, that the death camps, and the camps in many cases were the ones that were filmed to create the impression that there was this vast amount of Jews being starved in these camps. These were Eisenhower's camps for German prisoner of war.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just reference for people who really want to get into this, because this is something that General Patton was also very upset about. And one of the, when you hear him talk about the Semitic plot, you really wonder if he actually saw the Eisenhower's death camps as part of it. There's no actual documentation of it, but he does make the claim in a general sense. And then if you read things like, there's a really interesting book by this guy, Martin Breck, becomes a PhD in philosopher, university professor, and he, when he was 18, he went into the army, and then he ended up as a prisoner, as a guard in one of Eisenhower's camp, and the one in Adenauer, and that particular camp had about 50,000 prisoners. There were, they're not even sure, but 6 million, to use a number, could have been that number of Germans imprisoned after the war. And Eisenhower created a program to starve them to death.
There was disarmed enemy forces as opposed to soldiers. So they weren't covered by the Geneva Convention.
They wasn't covered. So that's the thing, is you have to go into all these little details. But he tried, Eisenhower, that what is known, because there are people who dispute this. They say, oh well, it was that we didn't have any food, or there's all these excuses as to why all these Germans supposedly starved to death. It was just an accident, blah blah. But there is actually a paper trail that you can trace, where Eisenhower maneuvers them into a category where they're not really being reviewed by Geneva Convention Red Cross people. And that the German people themselves are basically told that if they bring food to these individuals, they'll be shot. And
I think the argument is, since the Third Reich no longer exists, They're not soldiers.
Soldiers, yeah.
It's like, okay, that's cute.
Right. But anyway, there are a number of people who are prisoner of wars who then wrote testimony about this. And that's why this is, because remember, Tim, you gotta, I go back to the socialization, everything when it's viewed in a context takes on a kind of a different reality. When you view the Holocaust and, as like, this is the crazy, insane, warmongering German race, and the Jews were rounded up, and and so they should be given special consideration, and Germans should be seen as the comedian Norm Macdonald, was, suggesting as evil. So that kind of shapes both how you speak in public and but how you understand things, But think about this other context. Think about you had the firebombing of German civilians going on in this period, right? Dresden and Hamburg. You have the deliberate delay of the end of the war, at least according to General Patton, who said he could have ended it much sooner. You have the leaders of the war with these mysterious backgrounds, Churchill's relationships, family's long-standing relationship into Freemasonry, ancient Freemason family, who has a bizarre relationship with the Rothschild family, which we documented in the show we did on Winnie the Pooper.
Yeah, whose banks are loaning the government's money to wage the war. So
yeah, exactly. And so then when you have the Morgenthau memorandum being leaked, and you go, gee, the Germans just can't get a break, Tim. I mean, everything seems to be going wrong here. They would have surrendered or perhaps deposed Hitler, but the Morgenthau memorandum gets leaked. Amazing. And now Goebbels can then go to the people and say, look, we got to fight down to the last man. Don't want to, live in a slave state or be exterminated.
It's almost like they want Stalin to take half of Europe.
Oh, exactly. Yes, it is. Isn't it amazing that they want the Masonic Joseph Stalin to be the other half, from which he can then conduct the pogroms against the Ukrainians. Right. So, gee, Tim, the way that the history socialization works, you just think those poor Jews, in Europe, it was just terrible, and the Germans were nuts. But then when you actually, you step back from a second and go, well, things were pretty terrible for the Gentiles, though, really, weren't they? With the fire bombings of the civilians, with the death camps and the starvation, with the deliberate delay of the conclusion of the war, with a political structure on top of it that comes from the same organization that produced Zionism. And then now let's step back for another second, just for another big picture concept. Wasn't the Holocaust also useful for the creation of Israel?
Yeah, I think it kind of nudged it along a little bit.
Doesn't that help a little bit there? And so then you go, well, isn't that interesting that the group that is creating Zionism in the state of Israel is also creating the Nazi Party, which then ends up destroying the German people, but at the same time creating an amazing motivation and political cover for the state of Israel, right? It's just incredible. The Gentiles can't get a break, and every single thing goes right for the Jews, it seems like, even though you go, gee, like the socialization is that, Holocaust, oh, this is terrible. But history didn't really work out so bad for them, did it, when you start thinking about it?
No, not for organized Jewry. Obviously, many are being sacrificed in the process, the little guys, and you're just being thrown into the cauldron like everyone else.
Big picture, big picture people, these Zionists, aren't they?
Yes, well, you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet, right? And
I guess so. I mean,
Gentile and Jewish, and that's one thing where both Gentiles and the typical Jew on the street, Gentile on the street, are just as befuddled and manipulated as anybody else, and that they're made to one is made to have a strong identity, the other is dissuaded from having an identity, and that's how the dialectic is supposed to work. But you mentioned
that's how socialization works.
I mean, look at the German people. The destruction of the German people. The German identity has now been so cowed now that you can't even articulate when your country is being inundated with refugees or migrants from the Middle East or from North Africa, and you voice some displeasure with this, you're immediately accused of being a racist and being a Nazi.
A Nazi.
Yeah, because of this.
You're a Nazi.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing because the Nazis, from Sabatendorf and Helen Blavatsky, are the same pack of Masons that are producing Zionism.
Yes.
So doesn't it all work as a system, Tim? Isn't it clear what's going on here?
It's strange because then it also gets back. You see the Zionist project being advanced with this total war, the destruction of Germany, but there's also a broader strategic plan that's Anglo. That's why we call it Anglo-Zio. But you go back to Palmerston, these things. The question is that who's the dog and who's the tail, and is the tail wagging the dog at this point?
Well,
it's hard to
see. The thing is, I've always thought that question, which is basically, are the Masons or the Jewish banking families the power behind the throne, so to speak?
Yeah.
Right? That's how I've seen that. And I've always thought, the right answer is, who are these individuals who are Masons, and who are these elite Jewish banking families? We really want to do is test these guys' DNA to see what is the Churchill's family, what are these ancient Masonic families that have all the political power in Britain? What is their relationship to the elite Jewish banking families? Because you see, they work all the time. We over and over again, I've shown that. You get these mysterious alliances between individuals who have Masonic backgrounds, who are purported Gentiles, and people who are from the elite world of the Jewish banking families, and also Jewish psychological specialists. If you, this just pops up just over and over again. So you wonder, how do they stay in unison? How do they keep from, falling apart? Because purportedly they're so different. But you see, my question is, what if they're not?
Yeah.
What if the crypto identity that a CIA spook maintains in order to be more effective, as basically as a spy and an agent against another people, what if that's been adopted by the Masons, at least at a high level? That was their original point. I mean, that as the organization develops, you go down lower and lower level, you get further and further away. But this could have been what was maintaining its, centrifugal energy back, when it was in, the royal right of Scotland, Well,
and, it's funny because if you look at Jewish organizations, whether it's the ADL, B'nai B'rith, or let's say even Hollywood. Music, and these are largely Jewish or run by Jews, and Freemasonry, they both have an agenda of cultural and moral debasement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
this is the one that is a good characterization of it, but it's also basically creating both easy to enslave and genocide. It's not just cultural debasement. I mean, when you get to population that is, the single mom, the sexual predator male. They may think that it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but believe me, they are just one step from oblivion because they cannot produce families that will basically carry on, and they don't have any ethnicity that they can actually even relate to any longer.
Yeah, they produce these feral breeds of kids that have they're not socialized, they have no values, there's no discipline, there's no community anymore, and these things are just out on their own. And you look at modern America today,
right? And so so if you look at it, so basically America was set up, in this structure to be the tool to exterminate the Germans and with the Bolshevik Russian horde. Because the French and the British had been exhausted and they had been depopulated by World War I. So you bring America in, and you start wiping it out. But now, when World War II is over, well, you need to do something to get rid of the strength that was created in America that was used to destroy Germany.
Yeah, because America is this Masonic Frankenstein monster, this polyglot empire, right? It's a proposition nation, and this is upsetting to a lot of Americans because we have this patriotic. We've received the Parson Weems view of history, George Washington and the cherry tree and these things, and we want to think nice things about our country and all that. But really, getting what America is, this Freemasonic project, it's set up. It's perfectly set up for this because with a deracinated American public, the masses, the fodder, they're going to form the army, fill the ranks. These people are going to be ethnically cut off. They're not going to identify as Germans or Italians. They're Americans, and whatever that means. So they can be set abroad and be used to sort of as a blunt instrument against some of these ethno-states.
Yeah, and look what happens in America following World War II. I mean, you have the creation of the CIA, which immediately begins MK Ultra, which is focused on the promotion of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Mm-hmm. That's the covert operation that's going on. It's going to explode with Laurel Canyon, the Grateful Dead, all this stuff. But at the other side, then you have the march through the institutions, right? You've got the Frankfurt School and cultural Marxism that's creeping in. Feminism is becoming promoted. The ethnic communities of Europeans just can't get a break, can they?
They did the same. I was just listening to a show today talking about the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah.
And the Republic versus Franco, and with the destruction of the Franco regime, he passed away, then they passed the new constitution under a liberal constitution that did away with the confessional Catholic state of Spain. And now it's a free republic, and look at it. The high abortion rate below replacement level. All the transgender gay rights agenda is now, and Spain is in secular decline. Whereas under Franco, it was culturally much more healthy.
Yeah, say what you want about him. It was much stronger in many ways.
Yes.
And the current modern version just leads. Well, basically, it's going to become it's going to return to being a colony of Islam.
Yeah, exactly. And they were talking about what was going on in 1936 to 39. And it really, if you look at what happened in Spain in the 30s, was you had the government that was elected, that was narrowly elected, then pursued a very radical agenda of a secular humanist agenda against the Catholic Church. It passed laws saying the church. Just remember, Spain is a Catholic state.
Right.
Americans don't understand this, but there's organic, like Italy was a Catholic state. It's a confessional. It was part of the culture.
Germany was a Catholic state.
Or at least, the southern.
Even though there was a lot of there was the Protestants, but Germany had a huge fraction of it was Catholic.
Yeah, the South and West. The Rhine
and everyone else was basically a Lutheran.
Yeah, the Prussians.
So,
but we were talking with this because this goes what you noticed what was done in Hungary in 1919, and also the cultural Marxist agenda. But this is being carried out by the Republican government, which is largely infiltrated by Masons and communists. They made it illegal for the Catholic Church to be involved in education. They destroyed its state support, and this is also thousands of nuns and priests were murdered and raped. And this is the context of the Spanish Civil War, and you have to understand what the Franco regime was sort of this. A coalition of phalangists and Carlists and Royalists and these things who just hated the communists. They hated what they were doing. And Franco held this coalition together to win and spare Spain the horrors of what visited Europe in the following decade, because he did keep Spain neutral. We got to give him credit for that. But it was funny because what they did in Republican-controlled areas is they kicked the Catholic Church out in education and brought in actors and Jewish instructors in to teach them sex ed, all that stuff.
Gregor Lukčák
exactly.
With the Hungarian Soviet. This was the template. And this, of course, becomes cultural Marxism. I mean, the Frankfurt School then implements cultural Marxism all over Europe and the United States. But that was just... You're absolutely right. This was that really should be seen as an iteration of the same. How do you describe it? It's sort of the same plan.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly. It's this cultural Marxist plan, the culture, and they and again, really, Americans have a hard time understanding because we're given the doctrine of separation of church and state and these things. That's Americanism, but really, because we don't live we live in what's called a propositionation. It's a polyglot system, and it has its problems because of that. Because really, it's just the thing about America is no one really gets along; it's just big enough to cope with it. Right. And really, how it was originally designed perhaps could have worked because it was decentralized in these things. It becomes more problematic as you centralize power in these things. But I'm saying the point is that you couldn't separate Spain from Catholicism anymore. You could separate, one time separate France from that, and once you destroyed it, you destroyed Spain, and that's what Franco and his forces were defending. And it was his government was illiberal, but what does liberalism bring in the final analysis? If it causes your population to depopulate and destroy itself,
right?
Exactly. It's an indictment.
See, in fact, I would say Franco should now be, revisited as a historical character based on the experience that the United States has had. We can now look at the exact same cultural elements that were arrayed against Franco. We can see them now as having succeeded, in other words, having come to power in our own world, right, in America. I mean, you've got, you name it. You've got in our universities, in our culture, we've got all of these elements, secular humanism, however you want to call it. And what has it done? Does it produce a more stable democracy, a higher level of, of liberty? Nah. No. It produces basically a slave state, which is really easy to control because it's so without any kind of cultural or moral underpinnings, right? So when you look at Franco, and basically all of the individuals that were taken out by, kind of communist, Bolshevik, Masonic, Jewish influences during the 18th and 19th century, you've got to always place them in this context. Tim, it just goes back to this, in my mind, it goes back to the same thing that I was talking about earlier, where you've got all of the little details of history that we have been socialized to see it in a certain way, and this creates intimidation. What we call socialization is basically, we don't say certain things, right? Yeah. We're just quiet. We don't mention that well, and then, we don't want to talk about the Holocaust with some of the skepticism you might have in a public conversation because you don't want to have the anti-Semitic, charge hurled against you, and so you just keep quiet. That's socialization. But the socialization has been created by all of these little details, which are held together by this overall context, which has as its prime strength, its integral force, is the Holocaust.
It's the
center of the world. Really,
it's the default setting.
of our socialization.
Yeah.
When that goes, then suddenly you go, wait a second. This wasn't a slaughter of Jews. It was a slaughter of Gentiles. Suddenly then Hamburg, Frankfurt, the fire bombings, the Russian horde, the Eisenhower's, death camps, the holding on of Germany to the last civilian could be shot and raped, by the Nazi Party, the creation of the Nazi Party. The whole thing collapses. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the socialization keeps these facts, which are right there in front of everyone. I mean, this is like literally, we're not, there's some scholarship, but it's easily accessible to everyone if they want to get into it. And then it's suddenly, the whole world is upside down now. You see, everything has to be reevaluated because the analytic trajectory that the facts create don't produce a coherent understanding of the world. You see, suddenly you go, all of these things couldn't be happening against the Gentiles by accident. That's just preposterous. Too many accidents. When we're getting back to the Morgenthau memorandum and its release, man, it just goes along with this idea. Well, it was just bad luck for the Germans that it was released, was it?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because within all these intrigues, you have certain levels of interest being entertained or being forward, all for the service, I think, of a larger project. That's how you can look at the war itself, because many participants are in good faith fighting on both sides, not knowing that they're being set up. But some people have examined the motivations of Morgenthau, particularly his assistant Harry Dexter White, who wrote the plan, who kind of like had Morgenthau's right ear and kind of steered him in that direction. And he was exposed as a communist agent. So then you're tempted to see that the Morgenthau plan, it was a communist plan to get the Allies to be so brutal to Germany that Germans would become communists. You see?
But the good and clear-minded Allies resisted it.
Yes.
And we just sort of accidentally destroyed Germany. It didn't really. It was just a circumstance that, bad luck that Montgomery was vain, and so we held Patton back, and that kept the war going for another 6 months. And during that time, the Russians came in and killed everybody. Hey, it was just bad luck. We were very reasonable.
Yeah, and no one could look at a map, by the way, and tell what was going to happen. It's nothing, and so it's so obvious. I mean, it's not like it's 20/20 hindsight. No, it's obvious, and even Patton saw it, and Patton voiced. I think he voiced his opposition to it, and he was probably assassinated because of that. But the idea here is that with the Morgenthau plan, JCS 1067 was it was implemented. Partially implemented for 2 years, I think from October 1945 through July 1947.
Yeah.
And critical things happened politically. One thing was FDR's death, or maybe I'll get into that. But FDR's death. And then Truman becomes president. Truman doesn't like Morgenthau, and he accepts his resignation. And Truman starts to implement a different policy. But between 1945 and 1947, this is also the time of the Rhine Meadow camps, the Eisenhower camps, these 19 camps where hundreds of thousands of Germans perished after the war from neglect. And purposeful neglect, by the way. And so... and then in 1947 it changes, and you can say, well, then, the Cold War is starting to come on. And it became clear to the Allies that European recovery could not occur unless Germany was able to recover. You couldn't keep Germany down and expect Europe to recover, because Germany is so important to Europe, Central Europe. And the strategy Allies was keep Germany down and Russia out. And that became the Cold War, more or less. And so this is the excuse for letting Germany rebuild. You also have the intrigue. You can also see it kind of an intrigue within the American leadership, between the American elite, because within this Freemasonic project, you have certain wings. You could roughly broken down. You have the Hiss pro-communist wing and the Dulles pro-Nazi wing. And I do think there's a possibility that there are certain factions within this. The post-war environment, they're kind of battling it out at one level, and at the end, the Dulles wing won out because you have Alger Hiss, charged with perjury, exposed as a communist. Then that's when Nixon's promoted, because Nixon has a goods on Dulles and Bush, the Bush family. So his political career gets going out in California, and there's all this stuff. And so you have the Cold War politics, and you have the McCarthy era politics of the 1950s. The point is that all this is largely a stage, a play being put on for us to achieve a larger objective. Yeah.
And that is just a critical, perspective that people need to bring to understanding our world, is that the elites put on these pageants. When you think about Monica Lewinsky, when you think about Watergate, being investigated by the intrepid Washington Post.
Think about every election.
Like the so-called elections. Yeah. And now maybe I'm going to get a bridge too far here, but, even like the moon landing, I think these are.
One of these days we'll have to talk about that.
Yeah, we should, because, it's just, to me, it's just completely preposterous. This is just ludicrous. The idea that we can't do it today, but we could do it back then, we
could get a dune buggy up there back in 1970.
We could get a dune buggy. Okay, I'm just going to say, the dune buggy is just, this is their laughing at the public. What I was thinking? They should have brought up a '67 Mustang.
Well, I always thought it was kind of funny because dune buggies,
the Moonstang,
because they have dune buggies on the moon, and you have Charles Manson riding dune buggies in the desert.
Right. It's just, I mean, this is, they have a sense of humor, thank heavens. And this was basically, an example of it. That this was just preposterous. And so anyway, these things are pageants. They're just done to distract from the, the basic structure is this. They are developing technology that will be used for enslavement. Mm-hmm. Population is distracted by entertainment and encouraged to basically sex, drugs, rock and roll, and archaic revival.
Yeah, and so, you could say politics, and God forbid, even wars are entertainment.
Oh, exactly. I mean, it's just that's why when you have Trump as a reality, quasi TV personality becoming president, and then you have this Russian, pageant going on. I mean, you can see what they're doing to people's minds. They're just basically ending the partition between the fake TV and the fake politics. Mm-hmm. It's all becoming one blended event. And with Clinton and Trump, I think we're into a new era of melodramatic political leaders, but because they have to be more and more distracting as the slave state becomes more and more apparent. And so you're going to have an intensification of a very sexualized culture.
Yeah, that's what I think with Trump. The celebrity, the mixing of celebrity with whereas in the past we had, we had politicians. There were empty shells. There were puppets, but they were politicians. Now we have this combination to start. I guess you could say start with Reagan, the former actor. But
pay attention. In my opinion, pay attention to this latest thing with the Trump's aide, Hicks, I think her name is. Because she's a sex pot.
That's another thing. I feel like I'm being constantly titillated or tempted to being seduced by these figures. Yeah, these women. And all of a sudden I'm supposed to care who she is. And I'm thinking, yeah, okay, she's pretty.
Right. Well, she kept detailed notes, and she's been offered $10 million for a book deal. I guarantee this is going to end up in the Monica Lewinsky type thing, except this time it won't be a stained dress. There'll be photographs. Mm-hmm. We're going to get to see the Donald in action because I think they have to, continually debase, the public, and that would be a very logical step is to have a sex tape of the U.S. president.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think, just brace yourselves because
all these scandals have an alchemical property to them. They debase society because it gets it into all the stuff about his exploits that's openly talked about. Whereas one time when public morality was better, these things were just kept private. And you can even arguably say that at least back when Kennedy was president, they didn't bother us with this stuff.
Well, exactly right, exactly. But you see, as the debasement, you need to go into more sexualized culture as the slave state is created because sex is the ultimate distraction.
Yeah, President Trump will have his sex tape, and then, of course, the public has a right to know, right? So we got to see it all.
Well, it'll get leaked, just like the Morgenthau plan. It'll be leaked on the internet, and it'll get 10 billion hits in the first week, and there'll be ads on it. People will be making money. But this will come. This will come because, the trajectories are pretty clear. And so, what I would hope, anyone listening to us that can make sense of our, what we are saying makes sense. Just bear in mind that strength and virtue. Try to think of yourself and your family and your ethnicity with a future. How is that going to be created? What's going to bring that about? Well, the principles, and that's all you can. Because you can't go into specific detail, but the principles are the strength and virtue. You can't let yourself get distracted by, the things which are just, kind of mindless distractions, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and the politics. Mm-hmm. So
and that's all interrelated. I was a couple of weeks ago. You sent me the link to the article, about the Christine Keeler sex scandal and the Beatles.
Yeah.
I interviewed the guy who wrote the article.
Yeah, that was a great interview, incidentally.
Yeah. And so the point. Thank you. The point he made about the timing of the scandal in the Beatles, and how how the music's changing along with these sex scandals are being talked about openly in the press with the Profumo affair. It brings the collapse of one government, the new government with Harold Wilson, the Labour government. This also ushers in a new era of the swing in London scene. And this is a time before this, these things, London was a very staid, conservative town. Sex wasn't talked about in the press, but the scandal changed it, put sex on the front page of everything. You have this young 20-year-old girl being put out there, along with the music scene changing, and she's at the same time hanging out with the Beatles. In fact, she's
right
she's
having sex with them.
With Ringo. With Ringo.
Scene where the gangster, he comes in and he finds her in bed with Ringo.
Yeah, one of the relative of the Crate
brothers. Yeah, one of this gangster character. But I love your use of the term alchemical, and I hope that becomes widespread.
That is, I have to give that to Michael Hoffman.
And Michael, but that's okay. Yeah, you're right. But I just think that term is, as you've taken it up, is really important for people to understand. Is that, you think you have the Monica Lewinsky scandal, and it has some political dimension or whatever it is you think it has in reality, but its effect on culture, the alchemical effect, that is really the thing you need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, and it's very important. I was listening to E. Michael Jones was talking about Germany in the 1970s, and how the CIA was very involved in the importation of heroin into the West Berlin scene and these things into Germany, and also the production of they have an old the guy who was producing pornography films that were sort of mocking traditional Southern German culture, which is Catholic. With these pornography films, the guy who made them was I think a German Jew who worked for British intelligence during the Second World War. And,
he was carrying on with the assault on Germany with total war.
Yeah, and this was further debasement of German womanhood. These films, and how that cultural attack had a profound effect on Germany. Probably as destructive as the bombs that fell on our cities, 2-3 decades prior.
And in the current moment, not to interrupt, but I just wanted to point out, because I'm going to lose this thought in my head, that the alchemical reactions to the Pizzagate business, where you can see that basically it just normalizes pedophilia. They bring out the Jimmy Savile, and then you get Pizzagate right on its tail. The combination basically enables them to talk about pedophilia. Mm-hmm. And the more you talk about it, the more it's not sequestered. It's not, the things that are taboo are no longer taboo. And so this is it's troubling, because it could well be that this is just an organized way to just further ratchet down the debasement. The alchemical aspect. Yeah. Of these so-called scandals, which come to light in these moments, but they just seem very suspicious to me. And so, the going back to that, you were talking about the Beatles, that interview that you did. I just couldn't agree more. I thought that the way that they were basically the Christine Keeler business enabled there to be a foundation from which the Beatles could begin this, a more degenerate sexual perspective for, the people who are paying attention to them in Britain.
Yeah, and that's why, the establishment promotes them, so you can't say they're anti-establishment. The British Crown, and you couldn't have them showing up with Harold Macmillan on stage, but they could groove with Harold Wilson.
Right. Exactly. So, the alchemical aspect. Yeah. And so, the Beatles were clearly, in my mind, a cutout. They were created. There was a plan, and the plan was the counterculture, and they were just, the British invasion was just that, their way to bring about kind of an association with rhythm and blues music. When you go into the story of the Rolling Stones, which, has Keith Richards supposedly just seeing Mick Jagger on a train, and Jagger just happens to have all of these black artist rhythm and blues records. And of course, if you've studied Keith Richards at all, this guy has got more hidden Masonic symbolism around him than almost anything imaginable. He's just a 100% Freemason cutout. And then all they want to do There's like videos of the boys chatting it up with Richards and Brian Jones and Jagger, and they're saying, gee, we just want to bring black music to England. It's a really important thing, and it's go, really, is that something that three working class British guys would really want to do as a social project? Was this like a social project for a sociology class in high school or something? I mean, what causes a motivation like that? And then you go, well, where did the funding come for your group? And I think I sent you that link to that woman who had the information on where it actually came from. It comes from the London School of Economics, which was a Rothschild project. So suddenly we're back into the same old, Jewish banking family. They're promoting Winston, and then now suddenly, he sticks around long enough to, oversee the destruction of the German population. But now the family can be seen as linked into the next phase of destruction of, the culture, the project of integration.
Yeah, where do the Beatles go to when they're starting out?
EMI.
Or what Germans? They go to Germany, right?
They went to Frankfurt
before they hit it big.
Yeah, and Hamburg.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's it's an ugly picture when you start to think about it. It's just they have a sense of humor, and they're very well organized, and they're definitely shaping our culture for no good. Malevolence is afoot, Tim, and I think that as we build out the schematic, it just becomes more and more obvious that we've got to start looking at these things as tactical sociologic functions, right? These are not just history unfolding.
You made the connection because off call you mentioned the connection OSS to Jefferson Airplane, and
that's right. Well,
and OSS is the wartime U.S. intelligence agency connected to British intelligence.
Right, and it's just an amazing connection. I was just astounded when I came across it. There is a guy named Goebbels who worked with Donovan, who was the OSS head. Mm-hmm. He helped work with him to establish the CIA. Mm-hmm. He was then described as a Jewish community activist. But incredibly, he was the individual that Bill Graham, the rock promoter, Jewish guy, went to when they wouldn't give him a permit to put on the degenerate psychedelic music at the San Francisco Auditorium. And so Goebbels said, well, let me help you with this. He staked out the building next to it and found out that the police were using it as a brothel. This is a true story, right? So they go, really? And he says, and I'll expose this if you don't let Bill have his permit, which he got. And then the story goes, and this is where they kind of trip themselves up, because you see, when the story becomes preposterous, I think that's when, we have a chance to make some sense out of it. And the story became preposterous because the idea is that, well, Graham couldn't pay him. He says, I don't have any money. I'd like to help you, with this stuff. But in any case, I can introduce you to the people that I'm putting on my show. So this guy, who's like a 50-year-old Jewish guy, so naturally, he's going to love psychedelic rock music. He then is introduced to the Grateful Dead and the Jefferson Airplane. Now, the Grateful Dead and the Jefferson Airplane, they're just a bunch of pimply-faced acid heads, supposedly, who have no future at this point, right? This is the beginning of this whole thing. But Goebbels goes, I really want to be involved with you guys. And they go, gee, we think you're very cool. And they both decide, both the Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead, they go, he really needs to run the money. And Goebbels then becomes, he wasn't just like a manager. He actually took control of their finances. He was the one who ran the checking accounts. This is from the OSS.
OSS.
Now, right. Now you go, well, gee, that's odd. But then you go on, well, I guess Goebbels became just a rock and roll guy. You go, no, actually, he then goes on to become the core advisor of Al Gore, John Kerry, Barack Obama, Dianne Feinstein, and Barbara Boxer. Right. I mean, it's a natural trajectory. OSS, Grateful Dead, John Kerry. I mean, it just makes perfect sense. This is not a spook, right? I mean, it's just now, needless to say, Goebbels was also involved in secret societies. This is going to knock you out. There is evidence to suggest that he was one of the founders or founding member of the Bohemian Grove Club. They have these little odd clubs within a club, right? In Bohemian Grove, that they have the Owl Club. They have these little clubs within the clubs. Guess who is inside his club? George Bush Sr., Donald Rumsfeld, William F. Buckley, and Walter Cronkite. Now, there's just a natural trajectory for a guy who's running the Grateful Dead's money. I mean, there's nothing weird here.
Do you remember that film I sent you of Allen Ginsberg on Bill Buckley's show?
Yeah. I mean, that's just
Bill Buckley just lets him go on and on and on. Yeah.
And but of course, when Patty Hearst gets in trouble, now you got to go to Goebbels because he's the one who can get her off, And so it's anyway. So the thing is, this is just another example of of how culture is debased, and it goes back to this relationship between secret societies and elite Jewish families. And I'm just going to end Goebbels for a second, with the idea that he also was one of the ones who promoted Herbert Marcuse, right, with Eros and Civilization, the core publication of from the American Jewish Committee's, the Authoritarian Personality Project. And guess what? He was also a big integrationist, and he's the one who brought Eldridge Cleaver to America. And he said, I'm just in for free speech. I'm not really trying to debase the culture, but Eldridge, who was the Minister of Information of the Black Panther, he said, Ronald Reagan said, if Eldridge Cleaver is allowed to teach our children, they may come home one night and slit our throats. So you can see that's the one side of the dialectic. Mm-hmm. But Goebbels was unmoved, and he said, publicly says, I don't like you, I don't believe what you stand for, but I will stand for you because I believe in free speech.
Yeah.
Right. So there you have it. And this is this is the guy who was working with Wild Bill Donovan, and he was also a confidant of Winston Churchill. This is exactly the energy that comes when you see all of these little details that our socialization prevents us from organizing into a coherent thought. But man, when you flip the gear of our socialization and then you look at these facts, right, then everything changes, Tim. Everything changes. And suddenly you see not history unfolded and the moral structure of the Gentiles and the Germans being evil and, the Jews being, the victims of the Holocaust. What you see is a Masonic project that has secret society members and elite Jewish families, and they are actually manipulating history. And the group that is really getting hammered and genocided are the Gentiles. And that's why, when the show 39, when we were suggesting who was they, and I was saying, it looks to me like what you're dealing with is kind of an organization that was really developed from the war in the first century between the Romans and the Jews, and that this is basically a group that has a crypto identity, but has a revenge based on what went on in the first century as kind of their motivating force. Now, ask me to prove it. I can just give you analytic structures, but I can sure make sense out of history with this approach. And once my socialization is gone, and Tim, with me, it's just about finished. My world makes a lot of sense, whereas people who believe that they drove the the Moondoggy space shuttle around, or dune buggy around. I don't know how they make any sense out of this world.
Yeah, it's a it's a lonely place. It's lonely. It's lonely being sane.
It is. It's just completely isolating, and you just have to kind of,
Well, it is interesting, the idea of going back to the first century, because I think it was Sigmund Freud. He considered himself a latter-day Hannibal, waging war on Rome.
Yeah.
So
It's exactly right. And he kind of dressed it up a bit. He didn't say, I'm Judas Maccabee, I'm Hannibal.
Yeah.
But, the Carthaginians were Semitic and had some kind of weird relationships with Judea. In fact, I'll give you a little bonbon, something from the next book. Hannibal is, Semitic group. He's in Italy. He's actually in Italy for, a decade trying to create some problems. He gets driven out. And he went east and then south. And actually, in my opinion, I'll give you in the book, I'll show this, I think he's actually trying to get to Israel. But he doesn't make it. He's killed, or, that's the story. But then not too long later, like 40, 50 years later, suddenly you have the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans. And what I believe is that these were actually the descendants of Hannibal. And they bring about a new kind of Judaism, the stuff you see in the Dead Sea Scrolls that is, has the war scroll and all these apocalyptic kind of a perspective against the Gentiles. And people wondered, where does this stuff come from? A lot of people say, well, it was the Roman and the Herodian conquest of Judea. But, I think it may have been much deeper. I think that Hasmoneans may have been basically reflecting the original struggle between Carthage and Rome. And that's why their sectarian material is violent and anti-Gentile. But whatever is the case, when you come to World War II and then into MK Ultra, all the secret society stuff, the debasement of culture, you get the Vietnam War. I just don't think that the normie, the guy who has succumbed to the socialization, he just can't make any sense of anything at this point. It's just, nothing but confusion.
That's because he just takes in and receives the standard narrative the institutions are designed to give him, so he is confused.
Yeah.
He is confused, and that's the problem with relying on universities, public schools, the media, Hollywood, the mainline publishers, and these things. I was listening to a talk recently, and there, I think it was E. Michael Jones. He was talking about he has a book called Cardinal Kroll and the Cultural Revolution about this cardinal in Philadelphia, but in the 1960s, critical area of the 1960s, and he's uncovered all these schemes and machinations of psychological warfare being waged against the Americans, particularly the Catholic Church, in the 1960s. And he's at a luncheon in Notre Dame, and there's a Notre Dame history professor. Suppose it's a Catholic school, ha ha ha. But anyway, he tells about his research, and his history professor goes, "If this is true, why hasn't someone important tell me this?" And he goes, "Well, I guess I'm not important." But here is this history, here is his PhD, but he's an idiot. He doesn't know anything. He only knows what Walter Cronkite has told him, more or less.
But that's an amazing story.
He goes, but someone
I'll tell you, I think the best interview that ever goes on in the internet is you and E. Michael Jones. It is, every time you guys get together, it's just fantastic. And that is a great quote. It really shows you that the socialization is so strong that here's someone who's supposedly trained in historical analysis.
Yeah.
But his whole mind is a logical contradiction.
Why hasn't someone important told me?
Details or facts without just the socialization overwhelming his soul.
Yeah, I had a similar experience a couple of years ago. I was just at a family gathering. I even forget what I was talking about. But the particular topic, but it was revisionist, some sort of topic of revisionist history, and I'm talking, making my points, kind of methodically going through it, and the response I get is, "Well, why didn't I learn that in college then?" and I go, "That's a question you should ask yourself." That was my response. Why didn't you learn that in college? but check it out, okay? And it says, but
Right.
I should have learned that in college. No. You don't stop learning till you get out of college. So why go in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's sort of like the trajectory of the swastika. I was, I know you won't believe this, but every once in a while I get asked to go to social events, and I did, and it was a huge mistake. It'll never happen again. I'm sure the people there won't invite me back. But I was talking, and the guy was talking about the Holocaust and about Nazi Germany, and I was on the outside of the conversation. I go, the swastika, where do you think that comes from? He goes, well, Adolf Hitler invented it. I go, well, actually not, And I said, no, it goes back to British Freemasonry. And he goes, British Freemasonry? I go, yeah. He goes, why would they invent it? And I said, well, that's something you want to find out.
Yeah.
And it's like, but he wasn't going to do it, but it was the same thing. It was like I encountered the same thing where it's like, it's just the socialization is so strong that they have to fit details into certain impossible structures for their mind to function. It's like Hitler had to invent the symbol because he was in control of the Nazi party, like it just came out of thin air, and with this maniac who came forward who was motivated by anti-Semitism of the poor little Jews.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what. Yeah, I remember one time I was we were talking about World War I, and the Lusitania came up, and I was talking about this, the true story of Lusitania was set up to be sunk, with Churchill's thing, and all that, and America had no business getting into the war. Germany hadn't done nothing in the United States. Why did we ever get involved? And the guy goes, "Well, they were seeking those British ships, and they were our allies." No, they weren't. We were neutral at the time anyway. So, so that's that socialization. Just presumed that the special relationship with Great Britain is we're always allied because we speak the common language in these things. But
we're always allied because the Masons control both political structures.
Yeah.
That's why we're always allied. That's why, the Duke of Kent had, the swastika on his gravestone, and Rudyard Kipling, and also had it as his imprimatur in his books. And then suddenly it pops up again, with Helen Blavatsky, when she was being given a sanction by the Quattro Coronati as this very important Freemason, financially supported, and then off you go, and here comes the symbol, and it's, it just, but to look at history in that way, objectively, it all automatically requires it structurally requires that you don't have the socialization in effect. You see what I mean? It's so hard for people to ever get free of it.
And it's also the willingness to, shed yourself of your heroes and also of your villains. And that's more difficult.
It's far more difficult.
Yes.
I mean, Hitler is definitely a villain. Mm-hmm. But I don't think he's a villain in the way people understand.
That's what I say. Yeah, obviously.
You have to understand the villains,
He's not as extraordinary as they make him out to be. And when you look at the true history of the Second World War and the 20th century in general, you see a sort of a moral convergence of all these leaders and these things. Yeah. And
it's like people go, well, Hitler couldn't have been under some kind of Masonic plot. He hated the Masons. Really, he hated the Masons. How did he end up with the swastika as his symbol?
Well, that's just these are dialectics,
right? Exactly. And so they set this stuff up, and they you always have to create a believable identity for your spook.
That's like saying the Ku Klux Klan hates Jews, and Catholics, right? I mean, it's okay.
Except for the fact that so many of them are being some of these organizations are being created by them, and so it's. And that's why the Zionist Nazi parallel origin, because I just think that's a really useful one to bring out because people can then see how the dialectic operates, right? That's a really great dialectic because, it creates the rationale for the destruction of the Germans, but it also creates the rationale for the success of Zionism.
Yes, true. And it was the maturation of the Zionist project in the early 20th century, particularly a couple years into the Second World War, which switched the allegiance of many American Jews to Great Britain away from Germany, because prior to that they were pro-German. Then America's entry into the war, which is sort of a British Zionist scheme, right?
Yeah.
Rothschild, Balfour, and the Baruch here in the United States, and these things. So this is this changes, and all of a sudden you find now people can't. Of course, you really couldn't be pro-German because you go to jail after America declared war. But I'm saying it's when the Zionist project became promoted through British victory. That's when the Jewish alliance switched from being pro-German to being pro-British, and of course, the real formation of Jewish identity in terms of Zionism occurred from the cauldron of the Second World War, from which the Holocaust narrative was developed to rationalize and I guess make most Jews become supportive of Zionists. Yeah.
I mean, it was the prime driver of Jewish identity, of the creation of the State of Israel, and of also this status of Jews as not able to be morally criticized in the United States, which then, of course, leads immediately into the destruction of the Hays Code.
Ironically, the destruction of free speech, because now with political correctness and these things, you cannot say certain things. In some countries, you go to jail. But here in the United States, you're ostracized in these things, and the whole development of speech codes and these things, and hate speech laws that you see proliferating throughout the Western world and these things. And that was a trick of one of these Jewish organizations when they were radical and subversive. They supported free speech because the regnant value, or the regnant, I guess the default position, or the regnant values of society were conservative, more or less, sort of a generalized Protestant.
Free speech at that point was useful for debasing culture.
Yeah, but now when free speech is used to defend culture or to reinstitute some sort of moral order,
the plot against it. Let's get it the hell out of here.
Yeah, selective tolerance. That's always
exactly.
So,
Tim,
okay, well,
I got to go. This has been a great talk, but having been evacuated for my 5th time yesterday, which we didn't go, but at the same time it was like kind of a struggle to. Mm-hmm. You have to do certain preparations just in case a disaster occurs. But I think the future is bright. I don't anticipate any more evacuations, and we will be available next week for a great discussion, I hope.
Great. Enjoy your weekend. Take it easy.
Thank you so much, Tim. Talk to you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.